There are 38 films in the Godzilla franchise, so it's no surprise that many projects were scrapped along the way. In fact, there are so many unmade Godzilla films that trying to cover them all would result in a video that would last several hours. In part 1, we explored some of the most intriguing cancelled Godzilla projects from the Showa era. In part 2, we talked about the Heisei era, and this time I'm diving into my favorite unmade Godzilla movies from the ones that I find especially weird or fascinating or just plain interesting. The concept of unmade movies has always intrigued me. What could these movies have been? Masterpieces or forgotten messes. As a filmmaker myself, I understand this journey firsthand. Some of my own projects have come close to being scrapped, even at advanced stages. Let's go into the lost Godzilla films of the Millennium, Monsterverse, and Reiwa eras that almost happened. After the release of Godzilla 2000, TriStar briefly considered making a lower-budget American sequel called Godzilla Reborn, which would have used Suitmation on a small budget. The plot included a female TV reporter and a male hotel owner, with Bruce Campbell and Jamie Lee Curtis in talks to star. On top of that, Christopher Lee and Leonard Nimoy were also set to appear in the film. As much as I love seeing actors in practical suits destroying miniature cities, America just doesn't really do Suitmation like Japan does. Off the top of my head, the only big American movie to use Suitmation in that way was the Dino De Laurentiis King Kong movie from 1976, as well as its sequel King Kong Lives. I just can't imagine American studio heads taking the project seriously, and that was true when the head of production at Columbia Pictures basically just stalled the project, which was one of the many reasons it was never even made. Toho ended up producing Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All Out Attack instead, and Sony contemplated making a brand new reboot of the Godzilla franchise that would have been unrelated to the 1998 film, but they ended up just letting the rights expire in 2003. In 2001, director Shusuke Kaneko proposed His original idea, Godzilla vs. Kamacuras, would have featured Godzilla fighting the giant mantis kaiju that first appeared in 1967's Son of Godzilla. However, this was scrapped due to Toho believing that the concept of Godzilla fighting a bug was just too similar to what was released the year prior with Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. So, Kaneko went back to the drawing board and presented a super out there idea to Toho where Godzilla would fight a mutated astronaut. After surviving a space accident, astronaut Takagami transforms into the monster M, but regains human memories and emotions, especially his love for his daughter, Yumi. He and Godzilla would battle, with Yumi eventually sacrificing herself to empower M for a final showdown with the King of the Monsters. Despite this being a really cool idea, Toho found the story to be way too dark for a movie that would have been released around Christmas, so that idea was also scrapped. Kaneko's third idea, Godzilla x Varan, Baragon, and Anguirus, Giant Monsters All Out Attack, featured Godzilla battling 3 guardian monsters who protect Japan. It would have acted as a direct sequel to the 1954 Godzilla, ignoring all previous installments in the franchise. Surprisingly though, this movie was greenlit by Toho and production actually moved forward, with models being created for all 4 monsters. However, Toho stepped in and ended up replacing Varan and Anguirus with Mothra and King Ghidorah to appeal to more general audiences. In the 1990s, the idea of a crossover between Godzilla and Gamera was seriously considered by Daiei, the studio behind Gamera. But Daiei went bankrupt and then they were bought out by Kadokawa in 2002. The new management reignited discussions with Toho. Then Kadokawa president announced that the studio was working on a Godzilla vs. Gamera movie and that they were actively going back and forth with Toho Studios. However, despite their efforts, Toho ended up declining their proposal, choosing instead to work on the Godzilla Millennium series. Kadokawa in response made Gamera the Brave, which bombed at the Japanese box office, putting the Gamera franchise into hiatus for almost a decade. Even then, there hasn't really been a Gamera movie that was theatrically released since 2006. If anything, it seems like a Godzilla vs. Gamera crossover movie would be the perfect revitalization for the fire-breathing turtle. After the financial failure that was Godzilla Final Wars, Toho was apprehensive about making another Godzilla movie and was putting the franchise on ice for a while. In an attempt to indirectly revive the franchise, Masaki Tezuka, the director of Godzilla Against Mechagodzilla and Tokyo SOS, pitched what would function as the final film in his Kiryu saga. This third movie would have been a solo film for Kiryu, with Godzilla not actually making an appearance whatsoever. According to Tezuka, he submitted his pitch to Toho and was completely ignored. Beyond that information, all we can really do is speculate, since it's unclear what the story would have actually been or if other monsters would have appeared in the film. Normally, I'm very hesitant about solo movies like this that don't feature Godzilla. I've seen a ton of fan-made MonsterVerse movie timelines, and it's like, dude, no one is seeing a Varan movie. That will be one of the biggest bombs in American history at the box office. However, a Kiryu solo movie has potential since Kiryu is a three-dimensional character with a lot of depth. After all, the entire conflict of the Kiryu saga is the fact that the original Godzilla is possessing and fighting for control over the body of Mechagodzilla 3. There is so much that you can do with that concept, and not to mention, Masaki Tezuka has a great sense of scale, and I would kill to see him direct another kaiju movie. Overall, this project could have led to a super compelling story that would have added even more depth to Kiryu as a character and as a monster. Yoshimitsu Banno, the director of Godzilla vs. Hedorah, always had an odd relationship with both Toho and the Godzilla franchise. Shortly after the release of that film, Tomoyuki Tanaka had essentially forbid Banno from ever directing another Godzilla movie. Despite that, Banno dreamed of taking Godzilla to new heights with Godzilla 3D to the max, also known as Godzilla vs. Dethla. Starting in 2003, Banno worked with producers Brian Rogers and Kenji Okuhira to secure funding. The plot would have been this 3D IMAX experience where Godzilla would have fought Dethla, a pollution-based kaiju that is pretty much just Hedorah. The story featured high-stakes battles across global locations and intense human drama, with a reporter named Misha and her brother Jim navigating the entire chaos in New York City. Despite creative ambition, Banno struggled to get the project made, but he did catch the interest of Legendary Pictures, and this led to the MonsterVerse in 2014. That's why every MonsterVerse film credits Yoshimitsu Banno as an executive producer. Without his efforts to develop Godzilla 3D to the max, the MonsterVerse would have likely been stuck in production hell. While it was never officially greenlit, a sequel to Shin Godzilla was pitched by Hideki Anno, titled Shin Godzilla's Counterattack, a reference to the Japanese title for Godzilla Raids Again. I've seen a lot of misinformation regarding this project, with people saying that it would have taken more of a cosmic horror direction, with Godzilla evolving into whatever the hell this is supposed to be, but in actuality, these images that have been circulating for a few years now are just hypothetical ideas for Shin Godzilla's evolutionary path. See, nobody even knew this project existed until a few years ago when Anno said the following: I wrote a proposal during the filming of Shin Godzilla on February 3rd, 2016, labeled Sequel Shin Godzilla Memo. The primary working title for the project was Shin Godzilla's Counterattack, and with the assumption that Mr. Higuchi would direct. It was meant to be something like a Toho Champion Festival Kaiju Showdown. Since it was concocted to be released in 2018, the shortest time possible for a domestic-made Godzilla film to be released, it was a rough draft for people who wouldn't like Shin Godzilla, an idea that wouldn't cost too much or take too long to create. I believed that it would be a bad idea to let it go to waste, so I gave the proposal, draft, and visuals as a gift to Mr. Higuchi and Toho, but since it was premature or whatever, among other reasons, after the film's release, the discussion ended. While I did feel it was a waste, it's not something I could help since Toho decides what gets made. Yes, you heard that right. This would have been a throwback to the Showa-era rumbles of yesteryear. While it wouldn't have worked as a solid sequel to the original Shin Godzilla, this had the potential to be a really fun entry in the franchise. Don't get me wrong, I am so happy that -1 was made instead, but I would love for Toho to make another live-action Godzilla movie where he fights other monsters. After all, the last time that happened in a live-action is part 3 in what is now a trilogy of videos covering scrapped Godzilla movies. I don't think I'll be doing a part 4 or anything like that, since I pretty much covered every scrap movie that I wanted to cover. If you're new to the channel, Hi, welcome. Check out our original kaiju movies as well as our ongoing Godzilla retrospective project, which goes in depth on each and every Godzilla film in the franchise. With all that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick, you're watching Firewood Media, and I will see you in the next one.